The wind comes first. It arrives not as a breeze, but as something alive, something with teeth. It finds every gap in the furs, every exposed patch of skin, every moment of weakness. The temperature has dropped to 40 degrees below zero. At this threshold, exposed flesh begins to freeze in minutes. The moisture in a person's breath crystallizes instantly, forming ice on their face, their eyelashes, the fur lining of their hood. The world has become a hostile planet, and yet somewhere on the frozen steppe of Ice Age Europe, a small group of humans is walking directly into it. This is not a story of death. This is a story of survival against conditions that should have killed every single one of them. The coldest environments humans ever adapted to were not minor inconveniences. They were extinction-level threats that our ancestors faced with nothing but animal skins, stone tools, fire, and the most powerful survival technology ever developed, the human mind. 25,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, ice sheets covered much of North America and Northern Europe. Glaciers extended as far south as present-day London and New York. Global temperatures averaged roughly 6 degrees Celsius lower than today, but regional extremes were far more severe. The periglacial zones, the regions just beyond the ice sheets, experienced winter temperatures that regularly plummeted below -40 degrees. Wind chill could push the effective temperature even lower, into ranges that modern humans rarely experience outside of polar research stations. The air itself became a weapon. The Siberian steppe was among the most brutal of these environments. It was a vast expanse of frozen grassland, treeless in many areas, swept by constant winds that carried snow horizontally across the landscape. Blizzards could last for days, reducing visibility to nearly zero. The ground froze solid to depths of several meters. Rivers became impassable barriers of ice. Animal herds migrated across enormous distances, forcing the humans who depended on them to follow or starve. This was the world our ancestors chose to inhabit, not because they were reckless, but because they had no other choice. The more temperate regions were already occupied. Competition for resources pushed populations outward, into the cold margins of the habitable world. The human body is not designed for this. We evolved in tropical Africa, where the primary thermoregulatory challenge was staying cool, not warm. Our lack of body hair, our efficient sweating mechanisms, our relatively thin subcutaneous fat layers, all of these adaptations made us vulnerable to cold in ways that other mammals were not. A wolf could survive a Siberian winter with its fur alone. A mammoth could stand in a blizzard, insulated by layers of fat and dense hair. Humans had none of these advantages. Our survival required something else entirely. The first threat was hypothermia. The human body maintains a core temperature of approximately 37 degrees Celsius. When that temperature drops even a few degrees, physiological systems begin to fail. At 35 degrees, shivering becomes violent and uncontrollable. At 33 degrees, mental confusion sets in. At 30 degrees, the heart begins to beat irregularly. At 28 degrees, unconsciousness occurs. Below 25 degrees, death is almost certain. The window between discomfort and death is shockingly narrow. In extreme cold, without adequate protection, this progression can happen in less than an hour. Frostbite was equally dangerous. When tissue freezes, ice crystals form within the cells, rupturing membranes and destroying blood vessels. The extremities are always the first to go. Fingers, toes, ears, the nose. The body, in its desperate attempt to preserve core temperature, restricts blood flow to these areas, sacrificing them to save the vital organs. The damage is often irreversible. Survivors of severe frostbite frequently lost digits, ears, portions of their faces. Archaeological evidence suggests that some prehistoric individuals bore these marks, physical testimony to encounters with cold that nearly killed them. The wind made everything worse. Still, air at -30 degrees is survivable with proper clothing, but add a 20-mile-per-hour wind, and the effective temperature drops to -50 or below. The wind strips heat from exposed skin at a terrifying rate. It penetrates gaps in clothing. It carries away the warm air trapped against the body. On the open steppe, there was often no shelter from this wind. Groups had to create their own protection or die. Starvation was the slow killer. Cold dramatically increases caloric demand. The body burns energy simply to maintain its core temperature. Modern research suggests that humans in extreme cold environments may require between 4,000 and 6,000 calories per day just to survive, roughly double or triple the normal intake. This caloric demand had to be met through hunting, and hunting in glacial conditions was extraordinarily difficult. Prey animals were widely dispersed. Tracking them across frozen landscapes required enormous energy expenditure. A failed hunt didn't just mean hunger. It meant the beginning of a metabolic crisis that could prove fatal within days. Water presented another lethal paradox that is often forgotten. The glacial world was covered in frozen water, yet dehydration remained a constant threat. Eating snow directly was dangerous because it lowered core body temperature. The body had to expend precious calories to melt and warm the ice before it could be absorbed. This meant that obtaining drinking water required fire, fuel, and time. Melting enough snow to hydrate a group demanded constant effort. The cold air itself was brutally dry, pulling moisture from the lungs with every breath. Humans lost water simply by breathing, exhaling warm, humid air that was immediately replaced by air so cold and dry it might as well have been from another planet. Managing this hidden water loss was essential. Those who failed to maintain hydration found their blood thickening, their circulation slowing, their ability to generate warmth declining. Dehydration in a frozen wasteland seems impossible, yet it killed as surely as any blizzard. Our ancestors solved these problems through ingenuity that we are only beginning to fully appreciate. Clothing was the first line of defense. Not simple garments, but sophisticated layered systems designed to trap air, wick moisture, and block wind. Archaeological evidence from sites across Eurasia reveals bone needles, awls, and other tools used to stitch hides together with remarkable precision. These were not crude wrappings. They were tailored garments, fitted to the body, designed with an understanding of thermal dynamics that rivals modern cold weather gear. The inner layer sat against the skin, often made from the softest hides available, positioned with the fur inward. This layer trapped warm air directly against the body. The outer layer was typically made from tougher, more weather-resistant hides, with the fur facing outward to shed snow and resist wind penetration. The gap between layers created an insulating zone of dead air, dramatically reducing heat loss. Hoods, mittens, and foot coverings completed the system. Ethnographic studies of modern Arctic peoples, who inherited these traditions, show that well-made traditional clothing can maintain comfort in temperatures that would kill an unprotected person in minutes. Fire was the second foundation of survival. Control of fire dates back hundreds of thousands of years, but glacial populations elevated it to an art. They couldn't simply create fire when needed. They had to maintain it, transport it, and protect it from the elements. Evidence suggests that burning coals were carried in containers during migrations, allowing fire to be rekindled at new camps without the laborious process of starting from scratch. Hearths were constructed with careful attention to wind direction and heat reflection. Stones were arranged to radiate warmth towards sleeping areas. Bone was used as fuel when wood was scarce. Shelter construction showed similar sophistication. In regions where caves were available, they were used, but modified extensively. Entranceways were narrowed to reduce heat loss. Interior walls were sometimes lined with hides to create thermal barriers. In treeless areas, shelters were constructed from mammoth bones and tusks, covered with hides and banked with snow. Snow itself, counterintuitively, is an excellent insulator. A properly constructed snow shelter can maintain interior temperatures near freezing, even when exterior temperatures drop far below. Our ancestors understood this. They used it. Group behavior was equally critical. Sleeping alone in extreme cold is a prescription for death. Archaeological evidence suggests that glacial-era campsites were arranged for communal warmth, with multiple individuals sleeping in close proximity, sharing body heat beneath layers of hides. The social unit was not optional. It was a survival technology. Isolation meant death. Children and the elderly posed unique challenges that groups had to solve collectively. The very young could not regulate their body temperature as effectively as adults. They required constant protection, constant warmth, constant attention. The old, whose metabolisms had slowed and whose circulation had weakened, faced similar vulnerabilities. yet archaeological evidence shows that both groups survived in glacial populations. This could only happen if the group actively protected its most vulnerable members, sharing food, sharing warmth, sharing the burden of their care. This was not sentimentality. It was survival strategy. The elderly carried knowledge essential for the group's persistence. The children represented the future. Protecting both was investing in survival itself. The biological dimension of cold adaptation is equally remarkable. While genetic adaptation to cold is slower than cultural adaptation, there is evidence that some populations developed physiological responses to extreme environments. Modern indigenous Arctic populations show elevated basal metabolic rates, meaning their bodies naturally generate more heat at rest. Some populations exhibit enhanced brown adipose tissue function. Brown fat, unlike white fat, burns calories specifically to produce heat. Infants have significant brown fat deposits, but it was long believed that adults lost this tissue. Recent research has shown that cold-adapted populations retain more active brown fat than others. Circulation patterns also show variation. The bodies of cold-adapted individuals often exhibit superior ability to maintain blood flow to extremities without catastrophic core temperature loss. This is not a universal human trait. It appears to be a regional adaptation developed over generations of selection pressure in glacial environments. Caloric strategies evolved alongside these physiological changes. High-fat diets became essential. Fat provides more than twice the calories per gram compared to protein or carbohydrates. It is also the most efficient fuel for maintaining body temperature. Glacial hunters targeted fat-rich prey. Marrow was extracted from bones. Organ meats, which contain essential vitamins difficult to obtain otherwise, were prized. These were not primitive or accidental food choices. They were calculated survival strategies. The psychological dimension of glacial survival is often overlooked. Months of darkness, relentless cold, the constant threat of death, these conditions would break most modern humans. Yet our ancestors persisted generation after generation. They developed social structures that maintained cohesion under pressure. They created art, even in the depths of the Ice Age, painting cave walls and carving figurines. This was not frivolous behavior. It was evidence of minds that refused to surrender to the cold, that maintained hope and meaning in conditions that should have extinguished both. Migration patterns reflected deep environmental knowledge. Groups did not wander randomly. They followed prey animals along predictable routes, timing their movements to coincide with seasonal changes. They established camps at locations that offered natural wind protection, access to water, and proximity to hunting grounds. This knowledge was accumulated over generations and transmitted through teaching, language, and shared experience. It was a form of technology as sophisticated as any tool. The archaeological record reveals the scale of this achievement. Human sites from the last glacial maximum have been found across Europe, from the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains. Populations persisted in regions that were essentially polar in their severity. They did not merely survive. They thrived well enough to produce art, to develop complex tool technologies, to maintain social networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. This was not marginal existence. It was successful adaptation to conditions that should have been impossible. The cold relented eventually. Beginning around 18,000 years ago, temperatures began to rise. Glaciers retreated. Forests expanded into former tundra. The world that our ancestors had adapted to slowly disappeared, replaced by the more temperate environments we know today. But the genetic and cultural legacy of that glacial adaptation remains within us. The populations that survived the ice became the ancestors of much of humanity. Their resilience is written into our DNA. Modern humans rarely encounter true cold. We move between heated buildings and heated vehicles. Our clothing is designed for fashion as much as function. We experience discomfort at temperatures that our ancestors would have considered mild. This disconnect has created a profound underestimation of what glacial survival actually required. When we look back at the Ice Age, we often imagine primitive people huddling miserably in caves, barely surviving from one day to the next. This image is not just incomplete, it is wrong. Our ancestors were not victims of their environment. They were masters of it. They developed technologies and strategies that modern survival experts study with admiration. They built cultures capable of persisting through millennia of cold that would kill most modern humans within hours. The deadliest cold humans ever adapted to was not a temporary emergency. It was a way of life that lasted for tens of thousands of years. It required intelligence, cooperation, creativity, and resilience on a scale that we struggle to comprehend. Every modern human alive today descends from people who faced that cold and refused to die. Their survival was not inevitable. It was earned through struggle and ingenuity and an absolute refusal to surrender. When the wind howls in winter and we hurry indoors, we carry within us the legacy of ancestors who walked into that wind intentionally, who built their lives in the coldest environments on Earth, who looked at conditions that should have killed them and found a way to thrive anyway. We are their descendants. We should not underestimate what they achieved.